Hello and welcome to part 2 of lesson number 5 in our 4th unit graphing quadratics in our grade 10 academic math class. This is part 2 of completing the square. So in the first video I explained in depth how to complete the square. Now we're going to practice it. So what I'm going to ask you to do while we do this is sort of work along with me for sure, but also sort of flip your eyes up into the note just to sort of reference these steps. The steps will be helpful to you, I think, in just sort of prompting you to think what's the next thing I'm going to do here. So let's just jump right into it. We've got y equals x squared plus 14x minus 1. This is a standard form version of a quadratic in that it has no brackets. And we are going to try to change this into vertex form so that we can access the vertex and start graphing. So first thing we want to do is common factor out. So this is step 1. We want to common factor out the coefficient of ax squared. Now it just so happens that the coefficient in front of the ax squared this time, or the coefficient of ax squared, is 1. So we can certainly go about common factoring 1 out, which I think is just sort of a good practice. So there's 1. And then, of course, we would just have x squared plus 14x minus 1. Didn't change anything this time, but it's a good practice. Obviously, we don't want you to forget that you need to start building a perfect square trinomial from a perfect square. So step number 2 is to actually build the perfect square trinomial. And we do that by adding half of b, so my b value is 14, half of b squared. But in order to keep this equal and a balanced equation, we then need to subtract half of b squared. And then we have that negative 1 still tagging along. So the next line here, I'm going to evaluate what is half of 14 squared. And again, I'm just going to say it one more time. The reason that we put this value in here is to make a perfect square that we can factor, but the reason that we put this value in is to keep the equation balanced. So that's the rationale for it. Okay, so we are now going to do the evaluating. So there's the 1. We have x squared plus 14x. That's going to be plus. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. Squared is 49. And then minus 49. And then there's that minus 1 that's been dragging along the whole time. So now we're at the step where we want to factor this perfect square trinomial that we've built, but we need to get this negative 49 out of the bracket. We do this by multiplying it by our coefficient that has been common factored out front. So we're going to multiply it by 1. Now that doesn't change a lot this time, but that's okay. So in our next line, we are going to write down 1 x squared plus 14x plus 49, and now that bracket is going to be, that negative 49's come out of the bracket. 1 times negative 49 is negative 49, and there's the negative 1 that's been tagging along with us. So now, last step, we are going to factor this guy here, and we are going to simplify these two terms outside the bracket as well. So the way that we do that is we have our 1. I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit because we're building a perfect square trinomial here, we know the two binomials are going to be identical. So what are the two values that multiply to 49 but that add to 14? Well, that's going to be 7. And I know that this bracket will contain a plus because this is a plus right here. And then we simplify what's outside the bracket, and that gives us a negative 50. So we're a little squishy there, but we got it all in. So this has, we've completed the square. What is the vertex going to be? And I'm going to sort of write it under the line here because it's a little bit squishy. So the vertex here would be, it looks like a positive 7 is actually a negative 7 and negative 50. We know the direction of opening from our a value is going to be up. And that is our first example of completing the square. Let's do a second example now. Here we have y equals 3x squared minus 12x plus 8. Okay, jumping all the way back to the top, the first thing we're going to do is common factor out the a of the x squared value from the ax squared and the bx. So my a value here is 3, so I'm going to start by common factoring 3 out from the first two terms, and I'll be left with x squared minus 4x. And there's the plus 8. Now I want to build my perfect square trinomial, which I do by taking half of my b value, So in this case, my b value is -4. So I'm going to add -4 over 2 squared, and then I'm going to subtract -4 over 2 squared. And there's the +8 still hanging out on the end for us. So again, I know I've been saying it a lot, I'm going to keep saying it. The reason that we add this is to build a perfect square trinomial here. The reason that we then go on to subtract it is to keep our equation balanced. So let's evaluate those, the things that have been cut in half and squared for our next line. So we've got 3 bracket x squared minus 4x. So half of -4 is -2 squared, gives us +4. And there's -4, and there's +8. So I'm going to actually just scooch that down a little bit. I ran out of space on this last time, so I want you to be able to see it. So we are now almost at the end. What we need to do before we can factor this trinomial, however, is get this -4 out of the bracket. We put it in there. It had already had 3 factored out of it. So to free it from the bracket, what we need to do is take 3, multiply it by -4 to get it out of the bracket. So multiplying it by 3 gives us a -12 here. So the next line I'm going to write out will just reflect the new orientation of everything. So we've got 3, we've got x squared minus 4x plus 4, and now outside the bracket we have -12 and +8. So now, last step, we're going to factor this into the perfect square trinomial, and we are going to simplify these two right here. So let's go about it. So we've got equals 3, and again, we're trying to build a perfect square trinomial here, so I know it's going to start with an x, and I want to ask myself what multiplies to +4 but adds to -4, and that's going to be -2 in this case. And another sort of sneaky way of remembering that is that if this is a negative here, you'll have a negative in this bracket as well. And then we simplify the outside of the bracket, gives us -4. And there is our vertex form from a standard form by completing the square. So we know a little bit about this one as well. We know that its direction of opening is going to be up. Since this is a +3, our parabola will be opening up. Our vertex is 2, -4. And our plot pattern will be 3 times faster than usual. So instead of going out 1 and up 1, like if the 1, 4, 9 action, ±1 or ±2 or ±3 from our vertex, we would be amplifying that by 3, as you recall. And that will get that going on for us. So that's completing the square. We've done 2 examples now, and we're closing in on about 8 minutes, so I think we'll stop it here. Then we'll tackle the 2 more challenging examples below, and then we'll do one with graphing. So this is going to be a big lesson, but it's going to be worth it if you understand it. So again, review this lesson if you're not sure what's going on. If you're feeling good about it, then by all means, move right on to part 3.